Hello, my name is David McKay. This is the first in what will be a five-part series designed to support a study of my book, The One Open Door. What I intend to do in this series is to present the fundamental teachings of the book within the context of my life and my practice, much as the book does, in order to, help things to be interesting and easy to relate to. So to begin, I think the thing to know about me is that I never intended to be a Zen Buddhist monk. That was not a part of my worldview. I had no idea that was something you could even do. And I certainly never imagined myself to be someone who would end up devoting their life to spiritual practice, which is what I've done so far. And when I look back on how that happened and how I ended up not following the path that I was intended to follow, which was to do something impressive and important and, the same similar kind of things that most people are expected to do in our society, I have to go all the way back to the beginnings and to remember, the little kid that I was way back in the day before any of these things were even thought in my mind, and there was even any kind of idea about what I was supposed to do. Back then I was just full of innocence and wonder. Sometimes, I have a collection of photos from, way back in the day, and I see that little kid. He had freckles, and he had a, great big. This is going to be hard to imagine a little bit, but a great big pile of curly brown hair. And the thing that really stands out about that little kid in these photos is that he was smiling, and he had eyes full of wonder and awe. And I'm sure you can remember being in that state too, just being a little kid and just, before you went through all the trauma that we've all been through as we've been socialized. And just, we were here, we were present, we were aware, and we were exploring this incredible world that we lived in, that we all live in. So what happened to that little kid? When I look back, what happened to him? Well, what happened to him is he was socialized. And what that basically means is we have to go from a state of innocence and authenticity to a state where we are being the person we are supposed to be, a fake person who fits into society. And the basic mechanism by which that happens is that we are punished for being ourselves. That's kind of a radical thing to say, I know. But if you look back and you think about, what happened to you, I bet you'll find that that fits. That you were just going along, being present, being yourself, and being present and being yourself did not fit into like the expectations within your family or whatever your situation of your upbringing was. And you were punished whenever you went along with just what your instincts told you to do, and when you didn't follow the prescribed rules, which really make very little sense, especially from a little kid point of view. So that's what happened to me. And as a result, I went from being an unself-conscious, innocent little being to someone who's very self-conscious, full of self-doubt, self-judgment, and with all kinds of really unhappy beliefs about, who I am and what the world is. Particularly or specifically in my own case, I was taught to believe that I'm not okay, that I'm not a good enough person, that, there's something wrong with me, and particularly that, I'm incompetent and I'm inadequate. And I really, really, really believe those things because that's what I was taught. And I was taught those things at a point when I was way too young to question them, because the people who were teaching me those things, were big people. And I was a little bitty person, and I was forced to take them on. And that's what happened to all of us. We were all forced to take on these ideas about who and how we are that are absolutely untrue. So I went through that process, and then I kind of landed in my young adulthood with this expectation that I'm going to go out and do something important, that makes money, and I'm going to follow the moral path. I'm going to get married, and I'm going to, have children, and everything's going to be happy, and there's not going to be any problems. And of course, I'm looking at that from the lens of this angst and this unhappiness that had come as a result of my socialization. And I'm looking at the people who had made the choice that you're supposed to make, and I did not see people who were happy. And I still believe that that's what I was supposed to do, but it just seemed like that there's something wrong. There's something that doesn't make sense. And to my great good fortune, and I don't know where this came from, but it is something that I will be grateful for the rest of my life, I was unwilling. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't. If I had seen people who were following that path who seemed like they were really happy and fulfilled, I would have done it, or at least I would have tried to do it. But I didn't see anybody like that, and so I refused. And so what I did instead, to make a very long and interesting story short, I spent pretty much a decade on my own, running away from society, avoiding the path that was prescribed for me in all kinds of solitary ways. So I lived in vehicles. I lived in a pickup truck and then in a van. I was way out in the woods. I was raised on the East Coast in North Carolina, and so I was out in the woods here in North Carolina. And then I realized there's this whole world of desert out there in the West, and I went out into the desert. And so I spent basically, a decade running from that expectation, but also running from myself, running from a real connection with myself because I didn't know who I was. Because I still believe that the person who I was this fake person, the right person who I was supposed to be. And of course, I'm walking around as everybody is. I'm going around pretending like I'm being that right person and failing. Isn't that what we do? We present this facade. Oh, yeah, I'm good. I've got my stuff together and I'm happy. But underneath, I was just kind of eaten away by this, deep sense that I didn't understand that I wasn't happy and I didn't fit in and I didn't know what to do with my life and I didn't know why I was suffering in the way that I was. So that went on for a good while. And for a while, it kind of worked to run away, because when I ran away, I would end up, way out in the middle of nowhere in these really exquisitely beautiful places. And in those places where there wasn't any pressure to be this fake person who I was conditioned to be and who I thought I was supposed to be because there weren't any people around, and I was being reflected in just the beauty of nature, I would have a space in which I really got to truly experience myself. And it was beautiful. It was exquisite. I loved it. And I felt my heart open and I felt my mind open and I felt really connected with, at that point I would have called it God. I don't call it that anymore, but it's still really the same thing. I was connected with divinity, with God in a way that was exquisite to me and I loved, and it was beautiful. The problem was that in order to have that experience, I had to exclude all other people. And of course, that's not going to work because I also had needs to connect with people. I had social needs, I had sexual needs, I had all these kinds of different needs. And so, I would go off and be by myself for a little while. And then after a while, I would start feeling lonely. And then I would also run out of money. And so when that happened, I would go back into society for a little while, get some kind of super low-level job that didn't require any responsibility because I was afraid of responsibility, because if I had responsibility, it would reflect to me that I'm inadequate and incompetent as I believe myself to be. So just some really low-level, easy job, and I would save up some money. I would try to make some friends, and I would do that for a little while. And then after a while, I wouldn't be able to do that anymore because I would sink steadily into this sense that I'm not okay. And then once I felt like I had enough money, I would head out to the desert again or back into the forest and survive in the way that I had. So that went on for a good while, and over time I got more and more unhappy because it worked less and less for me to have that kind of survival strategy. And then I got to a very desperate place where I still had my unhappiness and it really had no way to escape it. And then what happened was, what always happens is the miracle. There's this old expression that I'm sure you know, that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And that's exactly what happened in my case. And so, to make a very long story short, I met someone who had a meditation group. And I had been reading a lot to try to figure out what was going on and what was wrong with me. I was reading philosophy and poetry and psychology and history and things like that. And they were all very interesting, but none of them actually told me what was going on. But when I went to that meditation group and I joined with people who were actually sitting, and I realized they weren't trying to think their way out of the suffering they experienced. They were doing something else, and I didn't understand what it was. But it seemed like that was really different. I was really excited about that. So I began to sit with them, and I started to meditate. I didn't have any idea what I was doing, and I didn't really understand it for a long time, but I loved it. I loved it that there was something that I could do. And, so eventually, after participating with them for a while, the woman who was running the meditation group invited me to go to a silent retreat. And I went there, and it changed the course of my life forever. Because when I went there, and in the silence and with the support of the teacher, who was obviously a very profound person and brilliant, she helped me to see what was going on. And I had a profound experience while I was there of stepping for the first time out of this conditioned fake person who I imagined that I was, back into my authenticity with an awareness of what I had been and what I was trying to be and how false that was. And it completely blew my mind. There's a story in the book about that, where I suddenly realized that, And I suddenly stepped out of it, and I just sat down and cried my heart out for a couple hours. And I went through all kinds of, I left that retreat, I went through all kinds of suffering and more kind of challenges. I ended up back at the same retreat with the same teacher the next year. And while I was at that second retreat, I realized that I needed help. And my life, as I was trying to live it, was not going to work, could not possibly work, that I was confused. I had no idea how life worked, and I needed help to, if I was ever going to be happy in this life, I was going to need help. And so I went to my teacher. Every day we had a very short one-on-one appointment with her. And on the last day of the retreat, after sitting like deep into the night and wake up early in the morning, meditating, sitting with my life just sort of all in pieces around me, because I could feel that my life was about to profoundly change. I went to the teacher and I asked to be her student and to come to the monastery. And this story is in the book too, but I'll never forget what she said. She said, "Well, what about the dog?" Because I had this little dog, and who was the absolute love of my life, and there was no way in heck I was going to go anywhere that she didn't get to go. And so we had a short conversation in which it was agreed that she could come, which I found out later that was the first time that had ever happened. And I think she could see that I needed to be there and I needed help, and that something really amazing and transformative would happen if I was, able to go to the monastery. So she let me come with Rhea, the little dog, who is described in many places in the book. And then as I left that interview, one of these experiences I can't forget, she leaned over. She's very intimidating. She was just really charismatic. And she leaned over in this way that she did, and she said, "You must know that it's going to be very, very strict." And she was right. And I had absolutely no idea what I was getting into. I had this crazy idea that I was going to go to the monastery and levitate, 6 inches off the ground and just be in bliss all the time. And that is not what happened. Let me check my time and see how I'm doing. Oh, good. So what happened is that I went there and I had, maybe 2 days of relative well-being, and then just the crapola hit the fan. And let me take just a moment to explain why. So what happens for us, for me and for everybody, from what I can see, is that through that socialization process that I've described, we internalize a system of beliefs and assumptions about who we are and how the world is, that ends up behind the scenes driving all of our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors. And it's not driving it in some kind of neutral, unbiased way. It's driving it in a very particular direction towards suffering. Now, that word suffering in a Buddhist context means something very particular. It's a sort of a technical word, you could say. What it basically means is it's the experience of being separate from our authentic nature. And it means it's living in the illusion of a self, like that fake person I've been talking about, that is separate from life. And I was suffering deeply. But before I went to the monastery, and even a long time after I was there at the monastery, I didn't know I was suffering. I didn't understand that I was separate from myself. I thought that who I was this fake person who was trying to be the person he was supposed to be and failing. But that wasn't who I was. There's this whole other beautiful, confident, connected, and deep expression of life that is me, and that's who I am authentically. And the process of my socialization had taken that experience away from me. So I arrived at the monastery, and I, once I got there, once the little honeymoon period was over, and I started to run into the fact that I don't know who I am. And I started looking around and say, well, if I don't know who I am, then who am I? And I started to sense that I'm not this conditioned mind. I'm not this set of beliefs and assumptions. And the more that I started to question that, the more conditioned mind jumped up to try to pull my attention away from my authentic nature and bring it back into the conditioned programming. Because it's programming. It's like software in a computer. It's just running. And unless we have an awareness of what it is and what it's doing, then we're just going along with it. To the extent that this thing that I call conditioned mind, unfortunately, for a lot of people, is absolutely running their lives. And I'm sure you can see that in yourself and others. The way people sabotage their lives, the way that they have all these crazy coping behaviors that they do in order to try to deal with these things that they don't know how to deal with their feelings. with the suffering that they're enduring. And so the more that became clear to me, the more conditioned mind kind of stood up to try to fight with me for my attention and my awareness, to keep me in that conditioned system, which is a survival system, and to keep me away from the experience of my authentic nature. And the book is full of stories of that, of how I would have these little moments of awakening, and there'd be this backlash and things like that. So what I want you to consider, if you're willing, is how did that happen to you? How did that same socialization process happen to you? What were you taught to believe? How were you punished for being who you authentically are? And what's been the consequence of that? If you look at your life, what has been the consequence of being socialized to believe that you are something, you are a self that is not who you are? And what has been the impact of that on your life? So that's what I was offer as a question to you. And also, as you're looking at that, what else is possible? So for me, what I found out through time is, and we'll explore this more through the video series, but what I found out is, living in the awareness of who I really am, which I am practicing doing. This is far from a completed process for me. I'm still on my journey. I'm still doing my practice. I'm still working with conditioned mind in the way that I have from the beginning. But what I've learned through the process is that there's this whole other possibility that exists outside of conditioned mind. Because once I let go of this idea of who I am and who I'm supposed to be, and got in touch with who I really am, then life has opened up, and I've gotten in touch with the incredible harmony of this world that we live in, and the incredible beauty of this human that I am, and then my life has gone from sort of a series of really sort of hideous train wrecks, you could say, to one that's full of magic and possibility. And I feel guided in my life by this greater intelligence, people call God or divinity or source or life or whatever, that is inhabiting all of reality and is within me too. And I feel guided by that to the life that I'm truly here to live. So what's that for you too? So again, how were you conditioned? What was that process like? What were you taught to believe? And what has been the consequence of that in terms of suffering in your life? And as you've gone through doing whatever kind of awareness and whatever kind of practice you've done, what have you seen about the other possibility? Okay? So I hope you'll have a good conversation about that, and I'll look forward to talking with you next time.